Imagine going to bed in a peaceful village after an ordinary day. You kiss your family goodnight, the cattle are resting outside, crickets sing in the darkness, and a cool mountain breeze drifts through the trees. Nothing seems unusual. Then, before sunrise, almost everyone around you is dead. No screams wake the neighbors. No fire consumes the homes. No earthquake destroys the village. When rescue teams finally arrive, they find hundreds of people lying exactly where they had fallen, as if they had simply gone to sleep and never awakened. More than 1,700 people are dead. Thousands of livestock have also perished. The houses remain untouched. The trees are still standing. There is no sign of violence. The killer left no footprints, no fingerprints, and no visible wounds. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a disease. It wasn't even a person. According to scientists, the murderer was a lake. This is the unbelievable true story of Lake Nyos, one of the strangest natural disasters in human history. Deep in the northwest highlands of Cameroon lies a beautiful volcanic lake surrounded by steep green hills. Known as Lake Nyos, it appears peaceful from the surface. Its calm blue water reflects the sky, while nearby villages are home to farmers who have lived there for generations. For decades, Lake Nyos was simply part of everyday life. Children played nearby, families collected water, farmers grazed cattle around its shores. No one imagined that the quiet lake beside them was hiding a deadly secret beneath its surface. The villages around Lake Nyos were small and isolated. Most families survived by farming corn, beans, bananas, and raising livestock. Life followed the rhythm of nature. Sunrise meant work in the fields. Sunset meant returning home for dinner before darkness covered the mountains. Electricity was rare. Modern communication was almost non-existent. People depended on each other and their traditions. Although the region sat within an ancient volcanic zone, there had been no recent eruptions that worried local residents. The volcanoes appeared long asleep. The lake itself looked perfectly normal. On the evening of August 21st, 1986, nothing suggested that history was about to change forever. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, villagers finished preparing dinner. Children laughed outside. Neighbors exchanged conversations. Some families gathered around small fires before heading indoors for the night. Dogs settled beside houses. Cattle rested quietly. The air was cool and still. If anyone had been asked that evening whether they felt safe, the answer would almost certainly have been yes. Then, sometime after 9 o'clock, something strange happened. Several people later reported hearing a deep rumbling sound. Others described it as a distant explosion. Some believed it sounded like thunder, even though there was no storm. No one knew exactly where the noise came from. Because the villages had no electricity and little outside contact, few people paid much attention. Loud sounds occasionally echoed through the mountains. Perhaps a landslide had occurred. Perhaps rocks had fallen into the lake. No one suspected that the sound marked the beginning of one of the deadliest natural disasters in modern African history. Within minutes, an invisible force began spreading outward from Lake Nyos. Unlike smoke, it couldn't be seen. Unlike fire, it produced no light. Unlike poisonous chemicals, it had almost no smell. It moved silently through the darkness, slowly, relentlessly. Following the natural shape of the valleys, it flowed downhill like water. Every village in its path remained completely unaware. Families slept peacefully. Animals remained in their shelters. No one ran. No one screamed. There was nothing to warn them. The following morning, survivors from nearby areas began noticing something deeply unsettling. The villages were unusually quiet. There were no roosters crowing, no children playing, no voices calling across the fields. As people approached, the silence became even more disturbing. Bodies lay scattered across the ground. Some people had collapsed beside their beds. Others were found near doorways, as though they had tried to escape at the last second. Entire families were gone. Mothers still held their babies. Animals lay beside their owners. Cattle, goats, chickens, dogs, even insects seemed strangely absent in many places. The silence was almost impossible to describe. One survivor later recalled walking through village after village without hearing a single human voice. Only the wind remained. News traveled slowly because the villages were so remote. When local officials finally reached the area, they struggled to understand what they were seeing. Nothing looked like a normal disaster. The houses were still standing. There were no burn marks, no flood damage, no fallen buildings. Food remained on tables. Cooking pots sat where families had left them the night before. It looked as though time had simply stopped. Even more confusing, not everyone had died. Some people had survived. Many survivors described waking up with terrible headaches. Others couldn't breathe properly. Some temporarily lost consciousness before eventually recovering. Several reported finding themselves surrounded by dead family members without remembering what had happened during the night. One man said he had fallen asleep healthy and awakened completely alone. His entire family had died beside him. Another survivor described trying to call for help, but finding no one alive to answer. The psychological trauma would last for decades. As reports reached larger cities, confusion quickly turned into fear. What could kill thousands of people overnight without leaving visible injuries? Rumors spread rapidly. Some believed the villages had been attacked with chemical weapons. Others suspected an unknown biological disease. There were even whispers about supernatural curses. The region already had a long history of legends surrounding volcanic lakes, and many locals believed angry spirits lived beneath the water. To some, the disaster seemed to confirm those ancient beliefs. International scientists soon arrived to investigate. The world wanted answers, but the first investigations only created more questions. Medical teams carefully examined the victims. There were no signs of infectious disease, no bullet wounds, no burns, no evidence of poisoning from food or water. The bodies appeared remarkably peaceful. Many victims looked as though they had simply fallen asleep. That alone was deeply unsettling. Meanwhile, investigators surveyed the villages. If an explosion had occurred, why weren't the buildings damaged? If poison had been released intentionally, where was the source? If volcanic lava had erupted, why was everything still intact? Nothing fit. Then researchers noticed another strange detail. The pattern of deaths wasn't random. Villages located in lower areas had suffered the highest number of casualties. Communities on higher ground generally experienced fewer deaths. It was almost as if whatever had killed the victims had flowed through the valleys instead of spreading evenly through the air. That observation became one of the first major clues. Still, no one knew what substance could behave that way. Scientists collected water samples from Lake Nyos. They tested the soil. They measured the air. At first, everything appeared surprisingly normal. The lake looked calm. The surrounding forests were green. Birds had already begun returning. There was no obvious evidence of a catastrophic natural event. For a brief moment, investigators wondered if they might never solve the mystery. Then one research team made an unexpected discovery. The first clue didn't come from the victims. It came from the lake itself. As scientists continued collecting samples from Lake Nyos, they noticed something extraordinary. The water near the surface appeared perfectly normal. Fish had once lived there. Birds still flew overhead. The lake looked as peaceful as it always had. But the deeper researchers measured, the stranger the readings became. The water at the bottom contained an enormous amount of dissolved carbon dioxide. Not just a little, an astonishing amount. It was unlike anything scientists had ever seen in a freshwater lake. At first, many researchers questioned the results. The instruments were checked again. New samples were collected. Independent laboratories repeated the tests. Every result pointed to the same conclusion. The lake was storing millions of tons of carbon dioxide deep beneath its surface. The obvious question was, where had all that gas come from? The answer lay even deeper, far below the lake bed. Lake Nyos is not an ordinary lake. It sits inside the crater of an ancient volcano. Although the volcano had not erupted in recorded history, it was not truly dead. Deep underground, magma still existed, slowly releasing volcanic gases through cracks in the Earth's crust. One of those gases was carbon dioxide. Over many years, the gas seeped upward into the bottom of the lake. Because the deepest water was under immense pressure, the carbon dioxide didn't immediately escape into the atmosphere. Instead, it dissolved into the water, much like carbon dioxide dissolves into a bottle of soda. As long as the bottle remains sealed, everything seems stable. But shake it and open the cap. The gas erupts violently. Scientists realized that Lake Nyos was essentially a gigantic natural bottle of carbonated water, except this bottle contained enough gas to kill thousands of people. For years, perhaps even decades, the carbon dioxide had continued accumulating at the bottom of the lake, layer by layer. The cold, dense water at the bottom remained separated from the warmer water above it, trapping the gas under pressure. Everything depended on one thing. The layers had to remain undisturbed. If they ever mixed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Researchers now faced another mystery. What had disturbed the lake that night? Even today, no one knows with complete certainty. Several theories exist. One possibility is that a landslide crashed into the lake, causing the deep water to rise. Another theory suggests that unusually cold rain cooled the surface enough to trigger the mixing of water layers. Some scientists believe a small volcanic tremor may have played a role. Others think several of these events happened together. Whatever the trigger, the result was the same. The deep water began rising. As it rose, the pressure surrounding it rapidly decreased. Just like opening a bottle of soda, the dissolved carbon dioxide suddenly burst out of the water. One bubble became thousands, thousands became millions, then billions. Within moments, an enormous column of water and gas shot upward from the center of the lake. Witnesses living farther away later described hearing a loud roar. Some even reported seeing what looked like a white cloud above the lake. It wasn't smoke, it wasn't steam, it was carbon dioxide exploding out of the water. Once released, the gas behaved in a way that made the disaster especially deadly. Unlike oxygen-rich air, carbon dioxide is heavier. Instead of rising into the sky, it sinks. The invisible cloud spilled over the edge of the crater and began flowing downhill. It hugged the ground. It filled valleys. It surrounded homes. Anyone sleeping inside those low-lying villages had almost no chance to escape. Carbon dioxide itself is not poisonous in the way many toxic gases are. Instead, it quietly replaces oxygen. As the invisible cloud entered homes, every breath contained less and less oxygen. People simply lost consciousness. Most never woke up. Many victims likely died without realizing anything was wrong. This explained why there had been so little panic. There were no desperate attempts to flee, no signs of violent struggle. The cloud had moved silently through the darkness while people slept. It also explained why livestock had died alongside humans. Cows, goats, dogs, birds, even insects in the lowest areas disappeared. The gas did not choose its victims. Anything that needed oxygen was vulnerable. Investigators later estimated that the cloud traveled nearly 25 kilometers, suffocating everything in its path. More than 1,700 people lost their lives. Around 3,500 livestock also died. Entire communities vanished overnight. The event received a scientific name, a limnic eruption. Before Lake Nyos, very few people had even imagined such a disaster was possible. Now the world understood that certain volcanic lakes could store enormous amounts of gas beneath seemingly calm surfaces. But understanding the disaster solved only part of the problem. Another frightening question remained. Could it happen again? Scientists feared the answer was yes. The underground volcano had not stopped releasing carbon dioxide. Even after the disaster, gas continued entering the bottom of Lake Nyos, slowly but constantly. Without intervention, pressure would begin building once again. If enough accumulated, another limnic eruption could occur. This time, more villages might be affected, The challenge was obvious. How do you safely remove millions of tons of gas from a dangerous lake? The solution sounded surprisingly simple. Engineers installed long vertical pipes extending from the surface to the deepest part of the lake. The first pump forced a small amount of deep water upward. As that water reached lower pressure near the surface, the dissolved carbon dioxide naturally escaped. The escaping gas then acted like bubbles inside a straw, pulling even more deep water upward. Once started, the system became largely self-sustaining. Instead of releasing all the gas at once, the lake could slowly breathe. Today, those degassing pipes continuously release towering fountains of water and carbon dioxide into the air. It looks dramatic, but every bubble represents danger being safely removed instead of accumulating beneath the lake. Scientists regularly monitor gas levels, water chemistry, and the stability of the lake. The system has significantly reduced the immediate risk. Yet Lake Nyos still demands constant attention. Nature doesn't stop. Neither can the people watching it. Unfortunately, Lake Nyos isn't unique. Just 2 years before the Nyos disaster, another volcanic lake in Cameroon, Lake Nyos, released carbon dioxide in a smaller limnic eruption. 37 people died. At the time, few realized what had happened. Only after the tragedy at Lake Nyos did scientists connect the two disasters. Then researchers looked elsewhere. One lake immediately stood out. Lake Kivu, located between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Unlike Lake Nyos, Lake Kivu is enormous. It contains not only massive amounts of carbon dioxide, but also enormous quantities of methane gas. More than 2 million people live near its shores. Scientists believe that under the wrong conditions, a large-scale limnic eruption at Lake Kivu could become one of the deadliest natural disasters in modern history. That possibility has led to decades of international monitoring and research. Fortunately, catastrophic events like Lake Nyos remain extremely rare. But rare does not mean impossible. The disaster forever changed how scientists study volcanic lakes around the world. Today, limnic eruptions are included in geological hazard assessments. Emergency planning now considers threats that previous generations never imagined. Lake Nyos also left behind another lesson. Nature doesn't always announce its dangers with earthquakes, lava, or towering waves. Sometimes, the greatest threats are completely invisible. A lake can appear perfectly calm. The sky can be perfectly clear. Birds may still sing in the trees. And yet, beneath the surface, unimaginable forces may be quietly building. On the night of August 21st, 1986, there were no monsters, no explosions that destroyed cities, no giant tidal waves, only an invisible cloud drifting silently through sleeping villages. It remains one of the strangest and deadliest natural disasters ever recorded, a reminder that our planet still holds mysteries capable of humbling even modern science. Because sometimes, the deadliest predator on Earth doesn't have claws, it doesn't have teeth, it doesn't make a sound. Sometimes, it simply waits beneath the surface.